Hi, everybody. I'm Joseph Goodman from Goodman Games. I'm here with Michael Curtis, our lead on DCC product development, and Jim Kitchen, who I've known for many years as a friend, fan, customer, and the guy I always see at every con. Jim, thanks for joining us today. I know you've done many great things with Goodman Games over the years in terms of charity auctions and things like that. And you had the idea I need to clarify the Judges Guild rollout for City State of the Invincible Overlord from Goodman Games. And you had posed some good questions to me that would help clarify it. So I'm glad to have you here as sort of prompting me with the right questions so we can roll it out correctly.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I think everybody was very excited to talk about the new City State of the Invincible Overlord that's coming out. I think per you, Joe, I think things got a little ahead of themselves in how this was rolled out. You were very excited at Dungeon Con and you showed it off. But there, unfortunately, are a lot of questions that hang over the City State of the Invincible Overlord, mostly from the prior Kickstarter, as well as things that everybody knows, which is the contemptible viewpoints held by members of the Bledsoe family that all came to light about 5 years ago. And this week has seen I would call an increase in temperature over all of these issues. There's certainly concerns about money's going to people who have made their anti-Semitic views very clear. I think you were very spot on in what you said 5 years ago about this and being unacceptable and so on. I think there's a lot of questions about monies coming in for the crowdfunding effort. And you and I talked off and on yesterday, and we tried to put together what I think is a very equitable solution that resolves, I would hope, all of the concerns that most people have.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to briefly reintroduce this project. And I think, I'm basically an introvert and a gamer geek. I recharge my batteries by staying home and reading. And I think or I should say I can't speak for anybody else. I fell in love with this project and I wanted to tell you all about it. What I should have done is led with, frankly, the business aspects of it and reassure everybody that we're doing it in a way that is true to my values and hopefully true to everyone's values. And reiterate some of our strong opinions on what Bob Bledsoe Jr. and some of his kids and so on said, which is completely unacceptable. So I'm going to start fresh and hopefully articulate it better this time. Also, listening to the community and people who have made comments, I think we actually have some really good solutions to ensure that all the funding goes where it was intended to go, which is reimbursing backers of the 2014 Judges Guild Pathfinder Edition, and royalties don't go to any unsavory cause or frankly anywhere past those backers. To start fresh, so Goodman Games is going to publish a 5e and DCC edition of City State of the Invincible. We've had contracts going back to 2008 with Judges Guild, originally with Bob Bledsoe Sr. and later with Bob Bledsoe Jr. And there's a lot of projects that, frankly, were pending at the time that some of those comments were posted on Facebook by Bob Jr. and some of his, family relations back in 2020. And I hate the things that were said. I don't get up and talk about my politics. I have many people in my immediate family who are in the groups that were commented on by the Bledsoes. I will get into more of that later. I do this because I like publishing games. That's why I publish games. I don't do this to talk about myself or talk about politics. Frankly, I think I need to fill in that space and tell people more about myself. So later in this stream, I will talk more about my personal life, my personal history. But I was personally very affected by the comments because many of the people I know and love are in the groups that were heavily affected. So I don't agree with the bigotry. I don't agree with the transphobia. I don't agree with the homophobia. I don't agree with the racism. I don't agree with any of it. And I don't want to be associated with it. And I don't want any money from Goodman Games to ever fund it or be perceived as funding it. When that incident happened, I said that we weren't going to publish any more Judges Guild projects. So we had a lot actually that were pending. We still have a lot that are floating around. The Janelle Jackway's ones came to be in large part because the royalties were turned into a donation. There's a donation to GLAD, and I believe it was, I don't want to quote the wrong cause, but associated with the Janelle Big Book back in 2020. And then the other Janelle projects came out. The way I rationalized, frankly, in my head, publishing the City State project that was already pending was that all the funds that would have been royalties were going to be used to reimburse the backers of the original never fulfilled Judges Guild project from 2014, Pathfinder Edition. I think a lot of people have brought up a lot of great points over the last couple of days regarding how do we ensure that happens. So what I'm here to discuss is a way to ensure that happens. in short, Goodman Games is going to create an escrow account, and all the royalties that would have been paid, written out as a check to Judges Guild for them to reimburse, will instead be put in this account. And all funds in this account will directly be reimbursed to backers of the original edition from Goodman Games. So we will act as the intermediary to manage the reimbursements for those who, frankly, never got their projects from the original edition. In addition to that, we're going to cap the number of copies printed for the book. So when the crowdfunding happens, I actually need to do a lot of math. We had some ideas on what the MSRP would be and the constants and so on, and the tariffs scrambled all that math. I have to go back and do that math. It'll be X thousands of copies will generate a certain dollar amount of revenue, which would reimburse everybody from that original project. It was an $85,000 project. So max royalties to be generated from the edition we do will be $85,000. We'll cap the print run at that amount, so there cannot be generated more than 85K. So we will be able to reimburse all the backers of the original project, and there will be no more funds left over to be dispersed. Judges Guild has agreed to this approach. So the outcome is that backers of the original project will be reimbursed from royalties from this project, and there won't be any more funds left over to go to Judges Guild.
And more importantly, one of the things that came out of last night is that one of the criticisms, I think one of the very valid criticisms that's come up over the course of this week is there was supposed to be remuneration from Judges Guild for another project with another company, where there seemed to be a lot of questions about what happened. There are authenticated instances of Judges Guild having sent payment to backers who requested a refund over the course of the last 11 years, but they have been few and far between. And frankly, I think it stretches credulity to believe that if Judges Guild were to receive the royalties, and I think I'm sorry if I've misused the word royalties, but the royalties coming to Judges Guild from this project the concern of a lump sum check going to Judges Guild and then refunds possibly not happening was the first thing to address. One of the things that Joe and I talked about last night is the escrow account will actually be handled by somebody who doesn't work for Goodman Games and who doesn't work for Judges Guild. The process kicked off last night. If you're not aware, for the first time in 5 years, Bob Bledsoe II actually logged into his Kickstarter account and put an update on the City State of the Invincible Overlord project, saying that essentially the project is winding down. There will be no fulfillment of that project, and that refunds will be taken over by Goodman Games. Joe and I, talking about this over the course of yesterday, we think this is the best possible solution to A, make sure that none of the funds that Judges Guild would receive will be touched by the Bledsoes in any way, and this can keep the transaction between the escrow account and the prior backers as clean as we possibly can. Now, Joe and I also spent a lot of time last night talking about what ifs, because one of the major concerns that we've heard from the community, and one of the major concerns that has come up all over the internet, and I spent an inordinate amount of time yesterday reading comments from the DCC RPG Rocks group. I've read all the comments that have been posted on Goodman Games YouTube videos, as well as their own Facebook page. I've gone through everything as far as In-World goes. I've read every comment on In-World. I want everybody to know that we have played the what ifs to the best possible we can. Joe and I talked last night about some of the numbers, and I think, again, this is pie in the sky numbers, so please don't hold either of us to this. But roughly the royalties that Judges Guild would receive as the licensor, which is the people who own the intellectual property and are licensing it to Goodman Games, the amount of money that they would receive from the project is roughly 10%. If the City State of the Invincible Overlord becomes the single most successful crowdfunded project in Goodman Games history, it would theoretically then possibly exceed the amount of money taken in for the original City State of the Invincible Overlord Kickstarter. That's a mouthful. What we agreed on is we've agreed to try to address all the scenarios. Number one is Joe voluntarily is going to set a physical cap so that the licensor, Judges Guild, there is a cap for the maximum amount that they could possibly receive. Let's talk about what happens though if.
Well, actually, Jim, and that's why I think.
Jump in. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, I recognize there's a need for transparency. what I think so I'm going to limit the print run. I got to do math, but basically we're going to print X number of copies. I'm sorry, man. The tariffs made a lot of things a lot. I got to refresh all the math. The MSRP of this box set, it's a huge box set with a ton of maps and books. It'll be somewhere in the $150 to $200 range. So we will do some math on if you print X number of copies times that MSRP times this royalty rate, you cannot exceed $85,000 in revenue, or sorry, in royalties. And then I'm happy to share the purchase order to my printer ordering that. I'll have to black out some info and so on, but we'll publicly show we printed this amount of copies, and you at home can do the math, and the amount of royalties won't exceed that amount. And I think on the crowdfunding, we can limit the number of pledges, so to speak. So you can say, this is a limited item. You can't pledge for more than 2,000 or 4,000 or whatever it is. So I think we can arrange it in a way that the maximum amount of funding to be generated through any scenario will be $85,000 and $1 or something like that. The only other scenario I can imagine would be if Judges Guild had refunded a huge amount of money and the number of claims we get is substantially less than that. And based on anecdotal evidence that we've seen, it seems as if there have not been that many refunds. I don't see
So
that
why
as
don't you
like
talk about that? Because if the amount of money that's raised by the crowdfunding project, if that lump sum in the escrow account is not chipped away completely by former backers, let's say that there's $5,000, $7,000, you should speak to contractual obligations, but your response to that. So why don't you let people know what you're going to do, Joe?
Good point. And I like to actually share how much money is in the account. However, posting a bank statement online is probably a terrible idea. But to the extent that I can black out as much information as possible, I'll try to, to ensure there's no fraud. I'll try to actually share how much money goes into the account, and maybe every so often we post it to show refund of $40, $20, $60 as they go out. To the extent that the number of claims is less than the amount funded, there's two possibilities. One is we refund everybody outright and it comes out great. The second is, which I think is most likely, is we don't get the amount of money needed, and then we prorate everybody who has made a claim. So if you pledged 100, by the way, I actually pledged that campaign. I'm going to be on the list as a personal backer. I know
And
you do.
and
A
I
lot of us
did, but
did.
I'm one of the people that got a refund. I'm actually one of the people that got a refund. So
Okay. So the other possibility is a prorated refund, right? You get 80% of what you pledged or whatever it might be. The other possibility is, to your point, Jim, we end up with some amount of money left in the coffer at the end because only so many people made a claim. And by the way, to make a claim, just to be clear, Goodman Games had no association with this earlier project. Legally, operationally, financially, morally, we have no affiliation with it. I can't log in. I can't see the backer report. I can't tell if you were a backer or not. So what we'll ask people to do is email us at info@goodman-games.com and include a screen capture of your pledge and some basic information like backer number, backer name, address. How do we reimburse you? Stuff like that.
And folks, let me just jump in to say that this is preliminary. We're going to iron out details. Joe and I are going to work behind the scenes and iron out details as we get closer to the launching of City State, because it very well may change between now and then. That info@Goodman, there may be a separate email address
Actually,
just
good
to make
point.
sure that things are channeled correctly. We are absolutely Joe and I in talking yesterday. Joe's committed to transparency in every regard. There were questions about, well, what if, and we've tried to address all of the concerns and the what ifs so that nobody's going to be able to say, well, what did you really do? Well, here you go. We'll bring all the receipts.
And to that point, what if we end up with X number of dollars left in the account? First, I'll tell you, if you were a backer of the original Pathfinder City State of the Invincible Overlord as launched by by Judges Guild in 2014, please send us your claim. It is our intent to have money generated to refund you in your entirety. There won't be a pledge item, but it'll be upsetting to me if we end up with money and 25 backers never even made that request. So please send us your claim. If there's money left over, I have signed contracts and I have to pay that money over to Judges Guild. So if there's money left over, Goodman Games will fulfill its contractual obligations, but we will also make a donation to a charity TBD, but something I think we all agree on. And that donation will be, equivalent to whatever amount we have to pay over. And part of the reason Bob Jr. made that post last night was because he and I chatted and I stressed to him the importance of certain things. And I will ask that they donate if there is any money left over, that they donate that check or that fund to a charity of our choosing. That's the eventuality that I have limited control over, but that would be the approach if there's funds left over.
And to your credit, Joe, that is the only variable that is out of your control. Bob Jr. essentially agreed to let Goodman Games take over this refund process because of all of the ill will the last 11 years has been around that prior project.
And
Everybody
honestly,
gets targeted.
you know, I I want I want to do the right thing, which sounds kind of crazy. But the agreement with Judges Guild was to provide that refund. I think what's come out over the last couple of days is a lot of legitimate concerns about, to your point, Jim, operationally, is that going to happen? So I think inserting Goodman Games as the, I don't know what you call it, intermediary to ensure that
Facilitator. Yes.
facilitator. Yeah, the agreement per se hasn't changed. There was always an agreement to use these funds to refund, but now we'll be the mechanism, the facilitator to ensure it actually happens and ensure there's nothing that goes awry.
But the Dark Lord changed the terms. Pray he changes them no further.
Quoting
So,
Darth
so
Vader with Empire
yes,
Strikes
yes. I
Back,
thought that's a
I've
good.
altered the
That's
terms.
That's right. He's altered the terms. Pray he doesn't alter. But folks, I would say this also. I have a lot of friends who were wrapped up in things 5 years ago. I've talked to a lot of people over the last few days, and what I would say is I have tried very hard, and Joe can agree or disagree, but I've tried to be the voice of the customer with all of this, and I've tried to be the voice of the people on the internet who have been like, "What the heck? Do you realize where money would be going?" And we've done our dead level best to try to come up with a solution that neatly allows us to do this as best as possible.
And
And
honestly,
I,
I should
I
have rolled it out this way. Clearly, PR is not my forte. This is how I should have announced it. I think if any of you out there are gamers, and I'm sure most of you are, you know what it's like to fall in love with a project. You know what it's like to just be so deeply engrossed in how awesome something is. And that's what you want to share with the world, whether it's your character or your setting or your latest game or your adventure. And I think I fell in love with the world, and that's how we announced it. And I should have addressed a lot of other things from the initial get go. And Jim, there's a couple other like I kind of want to address anything I can think of and respond to all the inquiries. So there's a couple other technicalities
absolutely.
I want to throw out. And if you in the audience have things that we don't address, feel free to send them our way. The goal is to get everything out in the open. Some people asked about PDFs, and when you get into this territory of X amount of dollars go over here and a print run of X, how do you handle PDFs because they live forever? The short version is we will only release PDFs one time, which will be on the crowdfunding platform. Due to the terms of the license, they won't be free. You'll have to pay for the PDF. We sometimes do free PDF with print. It won't be that way this time. If you want a PDF, get it on the crowdfunding. We can then clearly articulate this royalty times this many PDFs sold equals this amount of money. And after that, there will be no PDF sales. I think I'm going through my notes here. I think
And let me stress also, this will be the only printing of the City State of the Invincible Overlord OAR
correct.
edition. Correct.
Yeah, and
So
we'll do the math on what the royalty is going to be. I'm making up numbers. If it's X thousand and we pledge for Y thousand, that balance will then go into distribution and it'll last 6 months or 9 months or 1 year or whatever it is. And then it'll be gone.
and really and truly, one of the points that people brought up was, will there be a continuing trail of royalties to Judges Guild from this project? And unequivocally, the answer is no.
Correct. There will not. There will be a one-time payment generated from the crowdfunding and that print run. That'll go into the account, and then we'll use it to make refunds, and that'll be the end of it.
Right.
Yeah.
What else did you have in your notes? Poor Mike is just hanging out in his mid-century modern DCC home, waiting to jump in. Right? He's so patient.
I am more than happy to allow, wiser heads than I to do all the rest of this stuff because I'm definitely on the creative end of stuff. But I will say is that I would not have agreed to do this project had if I didn't have faith that we were able to do this correctly and do this in a way that it represented the values that I know Joe has and the values that I share as well. And I find it is a shame that in the process of going through City State and realizing where City State was in 1976 and where we are now, how it is a completely different world, and that is a terrible event because there is so much goodness in what we want to call like the golden age of Judges Guild in the late 70s and the early 80s. And that's what we were kind of got ourselves wrapped up in, which kind of led to this, is because we were thinking about how awesome that projects were and how literally, and I say this without the slightest bit of hyperbole, how City State literally changed the role-playing game, not only the industry itself, but the consumer, like, and how we consume this stuff. So the OAR line has always been about the preservation, the historical. I come from an archival background, so I'm always looking at things that what we use in the profession of historical significance. And out of everything that we published, I think outside of maybe the first OAR book, City State is definitely one of the watershed moments in the role playing game industry. So.
And I think that's a good time to sort of say this, Joe. One of the questions that came up is, well, how much communication has there been between Joe and the Bloodsaws and so on? Do you want to talk to what the last 5 years has been like, Joe?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. And I'm going to lead with the fact that the entire creative contributions to this project include Mike and a number of writers and artists. The Bloodsaws have not contributed creatively or editorially. So you're not going to see chapter 6 written by so-and-so. There's a copyright statement, and we had to send the manuscript to them for approval. There is no other creative, or I don't know what you call it. There's no other contribution from anybody outside of the Goodman Games core staff or core team, if you want to call it that. The Bloodsaws are not in any way involved creatively beyond a copyright statement. I've had it's actually, Jim, I was trying to remember exactly. Other than last night, I think the last phone call I had with Bob Jr., it was in my old car. I bought my new car in late 2020. So I think I remember having this conversation in my old car because I pulled over to have the conversation when the call happened. So it would have been sometime in 2020. I believe that was the last time we spoke on the phone other than last night. We traded a couple emails, which were the contractually required approvals. Honestly, and it has been very limited. I had updated him on our plans to announce it and had not heard anything. That's kind of it.
And I think it's important because this might be a really good time to sort of talk. Let's sort of go back to 2020, and I think Joe and I realized yesterday in our phone calls and whatnot that I think I was the one that tipped you off about things in 2020. Why don't you talk about? Let's go back 5 years and let's talk about everything.
Yeah,
And this,
I actually, again, I don't talk about this, but I remember the phone call I had with Bob Jr. that day. I called him and was very, very vocal with him, about what he said. And he, anyway, and I told him that was it. There was no coming back. And we made that statement with Janelle. That was actually at DunderCon, if I remember correctly. So it would
yes, you were at
like
DunderCon.
February. Yeah.
Yes, that was February 19th.
Okay,
Yeah.
you got a better memory than I do. And I don't know what else to say. It was horrible and offensive, and nothing he said was appropriate on any planet in the multiverse. I think I'm not alone in being offended by all of it, and I don't agree with any of it.
Yeah, I mean, really and truly, anybody can go out and find all the screen captures. It was, another publisher sued over it and won. There were a lot of hurt feelings. I think when I always think about the DCC community, one of the things that I would say is that it's a community that has managed quite successfully to be an umbrella over whatever different way you want to slice the population, politically, religiously. It doesn't matter. Once you're part of DCC, hashtag not a cult. I think one of the greatest things about it is that the table is always open. There's always an extra chair, and inclusive is an understatement. I've seen people who probably, if they were outside of a con or somewhere, probably, I mean, you get a lot of people together in the community that probably wouldn't spend time with each other. But at no point in yesterday or over the last 5 years or over the last 15 years that I've been a part of DCC and the community as a whole, I've never seen anything like the reprehensible things that were coming out 5 years ago. And Joe, I've said for a long time that Joe it likes to sort of keep his personal life at arm's length, right? That it's good and it's got some and bad to it as well. But I think this is that time where you sort of have to take the hat off, Joe, and I think you do sort of have to talk about 5 years ago, because I think there's some people who have dismissed you this week, both within the community and without. They haven't given you the benefit of the doubt, and that's a real shame, because I think your track record should say a lot about you, but this might be the great chance to sort of address some of that.
Yeah, obviously Good Mythical Games has been around. Well, maybe not obviously. Some of you may have just found us in the last week or the last 6 months, or the last year. We've been around for 24 years.
Sorry.
Yeah. So first of all, I am sorry to anybody, frankly, to everybody. If you're in the DCC community or in any gaming community or in any way affiliated with Good Mythical Games, I never wanted to cast this cloud on you. Bob Bledsoe Sr. created an amazing product in the late 70s. It has had a cloud on it for many years due to frankly, the actions of the people who inherited that property. And I didn't want that cloud to ever be over Good Mythical Games. So I'm sorry to anybody who's been affected by this. And I appreciate everybody who has given us the grace, the goodwill to give us a chance to explain better, or to give me a chance to explain better, because I didn't do a good job up front. I think to Jim's point, I like that term dark master, which people use to refer to me. I'm quite comfortable with that because I'm an introvert, man. I just want to stay home and read and play games and hang out with my family. But I think I need to talk about myself a little bit more, because I think part of the reason that things got filled in the way they did is because I haven't filled that void. So
in an absence of information, people create fiction.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk, I think probably for many of the people who have been around Good Mythical Games a long time know this history I'm about to share, but I don't think I've publicly ever stated it. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who I am and where I come from. And not many people come from such a place. So, and Jim and Mike, Mike, I know you've heard some of this. Jim, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but just jump in with questions. And honestly, my inclination is not to share this. So if I start veering away, like, ask me a question, hold me accountable. I want people to realize who I am other than a gamer geek. So it's like, where do I start? I live north of San Francisco. I'm what you call a San Francisco liberal. I'm about as liberal as you can get. My wife is not white. My kids are biracial. I have neurodivergency in my immediate family, ADHD and autism. If you look at the family reunion photos from my family, we used to joke it's like the United Nations. I have aunts and cousins from 3 different continents. We are many shades in my extended family. I have cousins who are publicly gay. I have cousins who are publicly trans. My immediate family is filled with a level of diversity that many people, I also live in San Francisco, but many people don't encounter this kind of diversity in their life through their workplace or natural, I don't know, just natural activities. I have it in my immediate family. My oldest son goes to a Jewish school. I'm not Jewish, but this school is a very good fit for him. So a significant part of my social circle is Jewish. One of my oldest and best friends, who some of you may have met at Gen Con. I'm not going to name people, by the way, because I don't want this cloud to go over them. But some of you met some of my old good friends who have come to Gen Con and helped us out at the booth. You know, I stole his AD&D second edition player's handbook at his bar mitzvah like 40 years ago, whenever that was, because it was a freaking awesome. I technically borrowed it. I'm going to give it back any day now. But, many of the things that were stated when contrary to a significant part of just who's part of my daily life and the people who I care the most about. So my personal history, and this is where I swear I've met a very few number of people other than the people I was raised with who are from a background similar to mine. When I was born, my parents were communist labor activists, and that's not a lie or an exaggeration. I'll cover how they got there in a minute, but there was a periodical in the Atlanta area where I was raised called The Great Speckled Bird. You can Google this. It was kind of the focal point of a lot of civil rights and progressive activities back then. It was a weekly newspaper, very progressive, run by a collective, and my dad was one of the founders. My parents met on The Great Speckled Bird and through the social circles there. My dad was one of the founders who worked actively on this paper. And what they did prior to me being born and until I was maybe 3 or 4 years old was they infiltrated factories to organize labor unions and then integrate those labor unions. Atlanta politics at that time, I mean, I was very young, but I grew up in Atlanta, but it was about black and white. It was about segregation. One of my mom's stories that she tells, and like the factories they worked at, I remember she worked at I think it was General Mills, the factory that made, what I remember is they made Funyuns because she was new there and they put her on the Funyun line. Nobody wants to be on the Funyun line because you go home smelling like onions every day. You had to get seniority to get promoted to like the potato chip line. You know, but she stuffed bags of Funyuns. She told me she gained a lot of weight because you could also like eat Funyuns when they went by on the conveyor belt. She worked at like a cable factory that made like, I guess, telephone wires. I remember as a kid playing with like spools of wire that she brought home with me or with her to play. I don't know. It's a gift for her kid. And she tells the story of one of the factories she worked at the first time she walked into the lunchroom, you know, with her tray, and it was segregated. All the black people sat on that side. All the white people sat on that side. And she's white and she wouldn't sit with the black people. Sorry, I get emotional because like this stuff's important to me.
Well, and I think, but I mean, I'll give you a second to catch your breath and take a drink, Joe. I think first of all, you're describing a family. You're describing your extended family in a way that if you've moved around the United States, if you've been around the United States, you understand that one of the greatest concepts of the United States is a melting pot, and taking
That's my
in
family,
culture.
man. It is the
That's
melting
right.
pot, you know?
That's
Yeah.
right. And I think that's one of the reasons why the things that came out in 2020 were so incredibly hurtful across the spectrum. I mean, really and truly, I've never seen a cell phone of such epic proportion where I think they managed to enrage just about every way you would want to slice the population. It didn't matter if you were Jewish, it didn't matter if you were somewhere LBGT. It didn't matter. They managed to make everybody angry. And it was hurtful and it was awful. And I think the industry as a whole had a great needle across the record noise and stop.
Yeah.
And go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah.
Joe.
And my dad was actually at Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And so my dad died recently, so I'm upset about it. But he had 2 photos on his office wall his entire life. 2 photos, Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. Those are the 2 photos that are in the wall. Because those are the 2 people, and what he would tell me was one person can change the world, and they have many times. So my dad died September 27th of last year. So I have the MLK photo. And, let me give you a little more background. My dad grew up extremely poor. He actually grew up in the boot heel of Missouri in a small town. His parents couldn't afford shoes. We tell stories running barefoot until he got to school. But he was really freaking smart. So he became valedictorian, and then he got a scholarship to a small community college. Then he got a scholarship to University of Missouri. Then he got a scholarship to Harvard. Then he got a fellowship at Harvard. When the Birmingham lunch counter protests started, and if you know your U.S. history, I think it was Birmingham, but there were, black people weren't allowed to sit at the lunch counter. So many of them went and sat at the lunch counter, and that was a form of passive protest. My dad felt a calling. That's the word he used. He went and taught at a historically black college. So he taught at Morehouse College in Atlanta. He was able to get there with his fellowship from Harvard. Then he eventually dropped out and joined the Great Speckled Bird and became part of what he called the movement. So my history and all the kids I grew up with from childhood were part of the movement. And there's not many like us, and we often talk about it because it's a very unusual way to grow up. Most people have parents who are a plumber, a mechanic, a dentist, a accountant, whatever. My parents were communist labor activists. So when I hit 3, 4, 5, somewhere around that age, my brother was born, and my parents decided they needed like a straight job. Like, Jim, once you have kids, like your perspective changes. You have to take care of your children.
Things change dramatically.
Yeah. And honestly, I went through the same thing. I have 2 boys. So you have to take care of your kids. So they went and got straight jobs. So my dad worked as a legal secretary for most of his career. He only worked 4 days a week because he saved the 5th day for protesting. My dad had been arrested multiple times, always for civil disobedience. He told me the last time he got arrested, he was in his 70s. And I remember him saying, he's like, man, they treat you a lot better. The cops treat you a lot better when they drag you off once you have white hair. Like
that's right. Hey, I'm leaving a great Yelp review for you, man. This was awesome.
That's like the family legacy I got. I still remember being at Thanksgiving and I was at my brother's house at Thanksgiving and somebody called. They were like, hey, we were watching the news. I think your dad just got dragged out of the state capitol. And we were mad at him, not for that, because that was known to happen. But it was like, could you coordinate with us? So is your bail covered? Like that kind of stuff. And my dad was the intellectual, and my mom was the hard charger, the courage, if you call it. So I am in some ways the one who's different from them all. I didn't go into politics. I am not, political by nature in an overt way, the way they were. My other people in my extended family have very much gone into politics, and other people from the movement have gone into politics. There's a senator who was my parents' roommate when they were young in their communist apartment building. And now this person's a senator. I'm not going to name names, but there are people who have, come from that civil rights movement and gone a long way. And I was the weird kid. I drew a lot. I wrote a lot. I wrote my first role-playing game at, I think, 12 or 13. I went off to college. I just wanted to program stuff, make games, and so on and so forth. And somewhere along the way, I stumbled into the business world. keep in mind, my parents were communists. I'm a capitalist. I don't I don't like advocate for capitalism. It just comes really naturally to me. It's how my brain works. I think about buying and selling things, and I like games, and it just comes together to buy and sell games. That's how my brain works. But there's nobody in my extended family. I had one uncle who had a small business like 40 years ago, but nobody's in the business world and nobody comes from this background. So I frankly stumbled my way through it and somehow managed to end up with a game business just because that's what I like doing. And I met people like Mike and a number of other people. We were able to pull this thing off. But it all just happened from enthusiasm for the product, not from my background. And my background is very much from a place where I utterly despise the things that Bledsoe said.
And I would like to say I'm sure there is going to be somebody out there on the internet that says that Joe is saying all of this to try to score points. And what I would say is that Joe and I have had some very earnest conversations in the last 36 hours. And a point that I had made to Joe was that I knew some of these things, and some of this has sort of come out over the course of our phone calls. But I was the one who advocated. So don't blame Joe. If you're going to point fingers and say Joe is doing this to score points, please understand that that's not the case. More than anything else, Joe broke down on the phone with me yesterday talking about how things hit him in 2020. And we agreed that if he was comfortable, he should talk to some of that because all of us in some way, shape, or form in 2020 had our table turned over by all of this. We've all seen the housewives of wherever where the one, I think it was New Jersey, where the woman just turned the table upside down and threw it. I was somebody who discovered Judges Guild in the late 80s. I gradually put together a fairly sizable collection, and I can tell you the thrill I had when I finally had the last of the maps and I could cover an entire living room floor with all of the maps that were realized. And so I just remember reading some of the terrible things that had been exposed and thinking about, I thought about friends of mine from theater, from the Marshall University Theater Department, the local community theater, people that I've known. I've been very fortunate to have moved a great deal. I've lived in two different countries, and I just remember thinking about all of my friends within the gaming industry, all of my friends in Seattle or Minnesota or Calgary or even Central Illinois. I thought about my niece. I thought about my niece, and and in our family, my niece finally decided a few years ago to come out, and she has an unbelievable relationship with the person that I lovingly call my bonus niece. Right? I had two nieces, and now somehow I have been lucky enough to pick up a bonus niece. And I thought a lot about that. I thought a lot about what an incredible letdown this is. And so there were people yesterday that were advocating that this project should just be shut down. It should be shut down. There should be no going forward. And when Joe and I talked last night, one of the things I said to him, I mean, the phone call last night began with my point, which is if we can't get control of how the refunds are handled, if we can't get control of that, I said to Joe, I said, I'm going to say something and I need you to think about this through the course of our entire conversation. Are you willing to kill the project if you can't have that control? And by the end of it, Joe said, yes. That if we can't do this right, if we can't do this in a way that's going to make the community happy, we're not going to do it. And I agree very much with the sentiment from yesterday, where at the end of the statement, there were 965 people that gave money to the old Kickstarter, expecting to get an updated version of the City State of the Invincible Overlord, which I don't think, I think the last printing was probably what, 1990, 91, somewhere in there. I don't know. Doesn't matter. It's been more than 30 plus years. And all of those people have been twisting in the wind for 11 years, particularly the last 5 years, where nobody has been willing to log into the account. Nobody's been willing to give an update. You can go to the project on Kickstarter and look at the comments, And the comments will make you angry, but then really and truly what it does is it just turns to this terrible morose sadness because what everybody had the highest of hopes for, it all went to nothing. And what I think people really need to remember is this is taking one of the preeminent properties of the early gaming industry and bringing it into the 21st century. And if Joe and Michael and everybody else with Goodman Games wasn't doing this, my guess is that there will never be, if this wasn't happening, there will never be another version of City State of the Invincible Overlord. That this project is the last hurrah in some ways. And I think hats off to Goodman for being willing to take it on, but under your own terms.
Yeah, and I should have just outlined that from the start. It is so easy to have your blinders on and get caught up in what you're doing in the excitement of the product. So I think we'll do it in a way that ensures all the funds go to refunding backers, and if there's anything left over, as we said, a charity of, that we all mutually agree on. And I can't stress enough how much I disagree with the politics of the Bloodsaws. I am the kind of person, you and I talk, Jim. I think you and I have different politics, Jim, but I'll still hang out with you.
But did you take my? I mean, I took your calls, you took mine. At
Yes.
what point? At what point yesterday did politics ever come into the discussion?
I don't. Let me put it this way: morals come in. I think we should all agree that we don't give funds to people or organizations that espouse,
Horrific
bigotry, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism. But I don't think there needs to be politics. I really do think this sounds so hokey, but let's all game together and have fun. That's why we do this. We can join around at a table and be there and be inclusive and have diversity and enjoy stuff together. I think games are like life for me. I've been playing games my entire life, whether electronic, physical, tabletop, miniatures, whatever it's been, role playing. It's always there in my life, and I hope to always have people to share it with, and I hope that we can have fun doing it.
I never quizzed somebody what their beliefs were before I handed them my Mattel electronic football in sixth grade and let them try.
Yes, exactly.
I just don't understand that. I just don't.
Yeah.
And I think the
Sorry,
adults
honestly,
are
Jim,
real.
you got me to. I don't think I've said this to anybody ever, especially not recorded. If anybody wants to talk about this more to con, I'm happy to. Actually, I'm not happy to do it, but I will do it because I think it is important to fill the void because I haven't spoken about my beliefs. There's a reason Goodman Games has done many of the things we've done. There's a reason our art shows not just white people. Like there's a reason there's a lot of things in the products we publish, but it's not overt. And so I think perhaps I need to be more overt in sort of stating where I stand on things. But just to state it obviously, I believe in inclusivity and diversity and a lot of other things. The Goodman Games staff, you see, what's really ironic is one of the people answering our customer service emails where we're receiving comments as to what our opinions are on some of these things falls into many of the categories that are, I don't want to put people out here, but we have a diverse workforce. You see some of us on these Zooms, but the people in the warehouse, the rest of the staff, the marketing team, the ones you don't always see out there cover a lot of ground. And I think that's great. Different opinions almost always result in better outcomes.
Yeah, you have to have a diversity of opinions, but at the same time, one of the bedrocks of a diversity of opinions is respect. And I think one of the most egregious problems with things that came out of 5 years ago was a complete and utter lack of respect for the very people and things that those posts that were outed were about. And Mike, you can talk to some of this about what it's like to work at Goodman, but I mean, people apply for jobs, but you have a choice of where you choose to work and where you want to work and where you don't want to work. And Mike, maybe you want to dovetail in for a minute. What's it like working at Goodman Games, Mike?
Exhausting, especially this week.
Well, the last week, sure.
No, I will address that, but I do want to make one comment before we get too far on that, is especially about when we talk about respect. I think it is very easy to say, we don't want to think about politics. We don't want to think about, we just want to get together and we just want to play games. And there is a valid statement to that, but there's also a certain self-imposed blindness on that.
Yes.
Because you have to be very aware is that, especially if you're coming from a place of privilege, it's easy to say is like, oh, I don't care about politics. I don't want to bring politics in this. It's just about us rolling funky dice and everything. But you do have to be aware that, that things that are not even, not occurring to you can affect other people. So you can't be completely blind to say, I just want to play games and everything. You have to be aware that it's a much larger world, especially now. It's just, everybody's interconnected as we've learned this week and everything.
Actually,
But
Mike, if I can jump in, that's a very good point. My wife is not white. We live in an area. To make a long story short, she's had so many experiences, both here and over the years, where things that never happened to me, and I've had articulated to me so many situations that never occur. It doesn't happen to me, but it happens to her. Sometimes in the same location that I was at 2 days ago. And I think it's very valid. And often the only way I can only speak from my own experience. The only way I know about this is because somebody who's not a straight white male has experienced it, and articulated it.
right. So, I mean, so that's why it was, had Joe said, okay, we're just going to go and we're going to do City State as this, and we're not going to worry about the Kickstarter. We're not going to worry about anything that Bob said or anything like that. We're just going to go ahead because it is a thing of historical, historical significance that deserves the OIR treatment. I would have said, I think that's a terrible idea, and I don't think we should do that. And I have confidence that Joe would not have produced that. So the only way that we actually said, like, let's go ahead of that is if we could do it correctly. And, we fumbled the ball to begin with, but we believe that now that the cards are on the table and we see the plan, people will understand that for intention from before we even announced this was to do this correctly and do this in a way that did not aid and abet the people, people's whose opinion are far different from our own. So I hope you understand it. I also want to say people have been saying a lot of unkind things about me, but I totally understand where that's coming from. I understand, I get it and everything. And thank you for those of you who are giving constructive ideas to us and not just asking us, to do horrible things to me. So yeah, I do appreciate that. But that being said, I think if you look at Goodman Games, for where we've been coming for many, many years, I think we're kind of, in some ways, Joe is very quiet about stuff, but obviously we wear our badge on our sleeves. It's not too difficult to figure out our politics if you look at, some of the things that we've done and some of the stuff that we put out, but what have you. So I've always been proud of that. I mean, it's very easy to find a job where you just shut up and, and go ahead, especially from a creative aspect. So I have been very honored to, we're working with Joe. I have had the honor of being able to work. As I said when we announced this on Saturday, I was lead writer and designer on DCC Lankmar, my favorite literary work, and be able to turn that into role playing things. Now, because I've had the chance to work on my favorite role playing thing and bring that to a new audience. So I've been very grateful of that. In a perfect world, it would have been much different and much more easiest. If we really wanted to be easy about this, we could have chosen something else. I mean, we could have cranked out Palace of the Vampire Queen. I mean, and that book would have been this big, even with all the expanded out and everything. So I'm very honored to be part of this, and I have no regrets about being part of this or working with Joe. I think that's the easiest way that I can say.
So, Joe, I think one of the things that did come up was, and you said that there were a number of things that were up in the air when 2020 occurred. And so questions came up about what about additional projects and so on and so forth. Are they on hold? Are they looking, I mean, what's your sort of vision of the things that were still in process?
I think they're dead. I mean, we haven't done any development on anything other than City State. I can't imagine a scenario where we would publish them, and I don't have any plans to, unless somebody has a brilliant idea. I mean, honestly, the part that I struggle with is a lot of that original Judges Guild material was amazing, and I want the world to see it. On the other hand, I don't want funds going to anything remotely bigoted, and I don't see any solution to that. So I don't think there's any outcome here that results in any of that being published. I will say I welcome lots of input. I think several people have had really good combination of good questions and good suggestions over the last couple of days to arrive at some of the solutions we have. You don't always, it might be immediately glaringly obvious to somebody that this is the way you should do it, but we may or not have thought of that because we were focused on something else. So if there's something we haven't addressed, or if there is some clear and obvious path we're missing, I'm open to hearing that, whether it's about City State or about other properties. But we're not developing anything else. I'm now keenly aware of my own rationalization of this project, which was the funds go to the backers. I don't see any path forward for any of the remaining properties. Yeah, and if there is somebody out there, if we didn't address some concern, please bring it up. We've tried to, as Jim said, pay attention to what people are concerned about and find solutions. I think the escrow solution in the limited print run addresses the, what I would have called sort of the most consistent complaints we've heard, but there may have been a comment in there we missed or something like that. And so I'm open to hearing that.
I don't know. Is there anything else that you would want to say, Joe?
Sorry, everybody. I mean, it's really unfortunate the cloud that was initially placed between this original publication, frankly, by the Bloodsaw family and what happened in 2020 till now. And then I'm sorry we rolled out such a bungled fashion. I I need to hire a PR guy. I did not yeah, not me. I did not roll this out right. We should have led with here's how we're going to do it in a way that does not offend people and sort of satisfies the values we all share. And then that platform established, here's the main products. But I think I was really focused on the amazing product and not the other aspects. So to the extent that we ever get a do-over, please accept this as an attempt. And I will say, anyway, judge us on where this is now, not the last couple of days of us failing to articulate it properly. Jim, Mike, anything else you guys feel we should address, or we didn't talk about? Any comments we left out there?
No. I think I was asked to be on the show so I could explain a little bit about City State and why we've chosen this one. I don't think I got that. So, so rather than sit here in uncomfortable silence for a little longer, let me just, for those of you who have heard nothing about bad things about Goodman Games and City State of the Invincible Overlord in this last league, let me explain kind of why we chose City State to be as part of the OAR line. So I said before is that it's not hyperbole. They said City State literally changed the industry. Prior to the formation of Judges Guild by Bob Bledsaw Sr. and Bill Owen, there was basically role-playing games were like war game companies. They were producing rules because they were producing new games and new rules and rules variants and stuff. I would say there was very, very few, as in there might have been one or two like canned modules. So adventures that you go out and you buy, and has become this tradition for years. Bob and Bill, they had this crazy idea as gamers. They said, hey, we're gamers. We should produce our own stuff. I'm sure you can identify with that at home, everything. But they actually went to the person way. They approached TSR and said, we got this crazy idea. We're gonna produce stuff, and we're gonna do it as a subscription to make it even crazier and everything. People pay for our stuff, and every couple of months we're gonna send them cool stuff. TSR said, sure, you have the license. That's the stupidest idea we've ever heard. Why would anybody pay for something they can make themselves? And Bob and Bill put themselves together, and they said, okay, we have this. We have a couple kind of gaming aids, but we really need something to sell it. So Bob was a designer at General Electric, and in Bill's words, he could draw more than a straight line. And Bill had worked for his parents' travel agency doing like flyers and stuff, so he had graphic design. So they were going to go to Gen Con 9, the 1976, and they were going to debut Judges Guild. So they created this giant poster map for which would become the City State the Invincible Award, 34 inches by 44 inches. Which, if you know anything about printing, those are like the worst ratios you can think of. It's like basically they had to do it in like 3 different bits, and they had to glue it together. Bob couldn't make it to Gen Con, so Bill and another friend of theirs, they drove up in Bill's Ford Mustang. They drove up to the horticultural thing. They parked in the alley next to it. Bill said he went inside. He put up the big City State map. They had on a mat board. They put a card table down. He said he don't even know. He doesn't recall yet giving anybody money for this, so he doesn't even know he was allowed to do this. He just did it, and people walked by and they saw that map, which is this beautiful map. Bob Sr. had draftsman training and everything. So it was unlike anything, and it literally stopped traffic. People were like, what is that? And they said that they said that was the start of everything. People were like, they plopped down their money for the subscription. And they said, do you want a copy of the map? It's like, because we're going to send this out, but we'll have to fold it. But we have some with us. They're all rolled up. And people said, okay. So Bill said about a dozen people went out. They went out to the trunk of his Mustang. He opened up the trunk, and it had a whole bunch of rolled up maps. And one guy said, is this legal? And Bill was like, shh, no, don't tell anybody. But so it turned. So City State, that was like the first official release. They would begin to build on it with the installment, the subscription thing. You would get more maps. You would get like a 24-page booklet, a newsletter, and stuff. And then, of course, they would have to pay royalties to TSR. And TSR first starts seeing the royalties and like, these guys are actually selling this stuff. And it was because of that in 1977. TSR released the geomorphs of their outdoor geomorphs was a walled city for some reason. Somehow walled cities were very popular. And then the following year, 1978, was the first D&D module, the G1 Steading of the Hill Giant Chieftain. So if Bob and Bill and the original Judges Guild hadn't demonstrated that there was a market for this place, everybody would be homebrewing their own dungeons. You would not have a chance to go out and buy anything. The game of market would be a much smaller place. If you have bought anything from DM's Guild, if you've published anything on DM's Guild, that would not have been there were not for Bill and Bob and Judges Guild. That's how influential this is. There's very few things that change the entire, we would be probably a lot fewer game design companies publishing a lot of rule variants. So, I mean, they literally changed the industry. And if that's not worth giving an OAR treatment to, I don't know what is. So, and not only was it, such a historical place, it's also a damn fun setting. I mean, we go in. Anybody named the Invincible Overlord is not a nice person. So it's not a great place. But he's Sauron. So there's other people who are living in the city trying to make their lives and everything. It's not a entirely dour place. There is a sense of humor that goes through it. There are a couple funny encounters. Bob, Bill said that Bob has such a wide breadth of like sword and sorcery literature, and it is clear upon reading through City State. I think the Library State probably could have sued him, because there's the silver eel at one point. There's a lot of Lightbar DNA in the City State. One of the reasons I love it, but there's Call It to Lord Dunsany. You'll see, if you go through it, you're like, okay. And so the DNA between D&D, between City State and DCC was just there. So it was a perfect match. And if you dig what DCC does, and even if you dig what 5e is doing, or 5e is kind of brought back to these a little bit more crazy settings, more, diverse backgrounds. You have monsters living side by side with, the kind of the standard normal races and everything that is gone. You won't encounter that in the City State. No matter what kind of setting you want, what kind of campaign, you can find a home for it in the City State. It is an amazing base. And I'm very proud that I had the chance to be able to bring this into the modern setting, and through this bring it to new audiences, because it's one of those things that if you've only been in the hobby for a little while, you might have heard talks about City State and stuff like this, but to be able to see it in its glory is going to be I'm very, very proud to be able to facilitate that. So
I think I heard about it for 7 years before I ever actually finally was able to get a copy.
And that's it's hard to find, I mean, and this isn't the original, but it is I think it's 97% the original, and we kind of modernized it. So the one thing is that since this goes back to the start of the hobby, there was a lot of like rules mechanics, because we didn't have rule mechanics for it back then. So everybody was homebrewing stuff. So Judges Guild was like, here's a room for contracting a horrible disease, where now it's just a saving throw, but they had this kind of convoluted fashion and everything. It's all very, very quaint when you look at it now, but you realize there was no other way to do it at that point. So
we need less COVID, not more COVID.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate Jim and Mike, you guys coming on to talk about this. Mike, you did a good job articulating why the City State is amazing, and hopefully worth paying attention to all these years later, despite all the clouds cast upon. Jim, thank you for bouncing ideas off with me. And I'm hopeful that this solution addresses the concerns, but we wait to hear from people out there. You guys tell us if this works or not.
Yeah, and I think, and Joe, am I right? After this video comes out, there's also going to be a statement that essentially talks about all of this to try to make things clear and try to give people a reference document. I think one of the things that I would say, just please, that we're what, roughly 40 days away from the crowdfunding project actually launching. That gives everybody time to take a breath. I saw somebody yesterday talking about how they were going to sell off all their DCC material. I think you don't have to go to the thrift shop today. Just hold on a second. But all the bits and pieces for the escrow account and how that's going to be handled and who's going to be handled, that's all going to be set into place. That should all be resolved by the time the project launches. So just we'll get all of that out, and everything's going to be public, and everything is going to be as transparent as we possibly can make it, because I think more than anything else, the overwhelming sentiment is accountability, and making sure that accountability is there. And I believe that Joe is absolutely committed to that.
Yeah, well said. I am. So thanks everybody. And we'll keep communicating as we get closer to this happening and finding a way to resolve this.